in GRC, the role of EHS and sustainability compliance in GRC. I'm Jill Newberg, go-to-market lead for Enhesa, EHS Intelligence, and host of today's webinar. This event is a joint Enhesa CoreStream webinar, and we're delighted to have this opportunity to co-host a discussion with Paul Cadwallader from CoreStream, who I'll introduce in a couple of minutes. First, a few housekeeping matters. Of course, everyone is currently muted, but we encourage your questions and answers. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll take some time at the end to answer them and to engage our speakers with what's on your mind. Of course, our recordings and slides will be shared with you post-event. And as you're logging off, please join and provide your feedback in our surveys so we can inform future sessions just like this one. And thank you so much for being here. I'm joined by Mary Foley from Enhesa, our Expert Services Strategy Director, my co-host Paul Cadwallader from CoreStream, SVP Business Development, and guest of honor, Michael Rasmussen, GRC Analyst and Pundit from GRC 2020. I'll now pass the presentation over to Paul to introduce to us a little bit about CoreStream. Paul?
Thank you very much, Jill. So just a little bit quickly on CoreStream. So a next generation agile GRC platform. No code in terms of configuration, so that can digitize and digitally enable all elements of GRC. So that helps organizations to govern, so to reliably achieve their objectives, to address uncertainty, so manage risk, and to act with integrity, so from a compliance point of view. So CoreStream provides that 360-degree next generation GRC management.
Thank you, Paul. And we'll hear more from Paul throughout our discussion. This will be a very interactive session today, but I will take a few moments to introduce Enhesa to anyone who hasn't heard about us. Enhesa's mission is to empower businesses with the intelligence to create a safer and more sustainable future. How do we do that? We have a large team of in-house legal analysts who interpret and translate EHS and sustainability regulations around the world into actionable insights. This means companies understand and act on current requirements, prepare for future ones, and understand their context within the jurisdictions where they operate. Enhesa covers regulations from over 400 jurisdictions in almost 40 local languages for our over 1,500 customers, representing many well-known brands around the world. We all take this mission here at Enhesa very personally. Our solutions cover product intelligence, sustainable chemistry, EHS intelligence, and corporate sustainability to help the companies we partner with create a safer, more sustainable future with the intelligence needed to manage risk, stay compliant, and make sustainable choices. And with that, I'm going to invite Michael Rasmussen from GRC 2020 to introduce our topic for today. For those of you joining from the world of GRC, I'm sure Michael needs no introduction. Michael, you're here with us today because both here at Enhesa and at our partner CoreStream, Paul joining us from CoreStream, we've heard from our clients that the topics of EHS and sustainability compliance are becoming increasingly scrutinized through disclosure reporting. We know that's specifically driven by recent implementations of major sustainability reporting regulations, why Mary's here to discuss that with us all around the world. And we'd love to kick off today's webinar by hearing from you. Please provide our audience with a little context for GRC, sort of what it is, what it does, and how it helps companies build a framework for organizational governance, risk management, and regulatory compliance. And of course, why you, Michael, think that the industry is increasingly seeing sustainability and EHS compliance as an integral part of GRC. Thanks for being here, and the floor is yours, Michael.
Thank you so much. And so with that, I'm an analyst. My job is research. I research what are the challenges companies face in the context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and that includes ESG and EHS. And how do they go about solving those challenges with strategy, process, and technology? So I spent 7 years at Forrester Research. Well, by professional background, I have a business degree, then a law degree. But then, I've spent 31 years total experience, but 24 as an analyst doing that research I just mentioned. 7 years at Forrester as their top analyst, and now 17 years competing against the likes of Gartner, Forrester, Verdantix, and more. as an independent boutique. So I'm GRC 2020 is my analyst role, but I also own the GRC Report, which is a global news website on the news that's happening around the world on governance, risk, and compliance. Let's move on to our first slide of mine. We have a tale of two futures. Is our future a Blade Runner future, or is it a Star Trek future? Are we headed towards that environmental and social dystopia and disaster of Blade Runner? Or are we headed towards that future of Star Trek? In a few hours, I fly off to San Francisco. And you look at San Francisco in the Star Trek movies, and it's a very green, socially cooperative, clean environment. Very different from what you would see in Blade Runner. And so what future are we headed towards? The decisions that not only governments make or individuals, but corporations make sets us on the path to one of these two futures. I actually wrote a blog on this in December of 2019, a few months before COVID hit us, on this exact title, A Tale of Two Futures. Is our future that Blade Runner future or Star Trek future? And I mentioned that you look at a lot of GRC programs and enterprise risk programs, and they're lopsided. You'd think that the predominant and only risk in organizations is IT security risk, IT risk, cyber resilience. And I'm not downplaying that. Those are significant risks. But I mentioned in that blog report in 2019, you look at the World Economic Forum global risk reports, and how often do you see things like pandemic risks and environmental risks on the enterprise risk register going up to the board? Very few. But in the World Economic Forum report, those are the top risks we're facing. And of course, COVID-19 comes along just to prove my point a few months later. We have this tale of two futures. And we need a balanced view that includes ESG and environmental health and safety in the enterprise and GRC perspective on risk. Next slide, please. But the modern organization is chaotic. It's changing minute by minute and second by second. Laws and regulations are changing. Global financial services firms are dealing with 257 regulatory change events every business day coming from 1,217 regulators around the world. I was talking to our host Enhesa a few weeks ago in London, and we did the math and calculations that on the environmental health and safety side, there's about 297 regulatory change events globally, more than what we're seeing in financial services. That's a lot. Every business day, 297 roughly regulatory change events, and that organizations have to deal with around environmental health and safety. And that's not even keeping in the scope of the range of ESG related laws and regulations or the enforcement actions around that. But then the risk environment's changing, geopolitical risks, commodity risks availability, environmental risks, inflation, all these different pieces. But the business itself is changing. Processes, technology, employees, mergers and acquisitions that bring in redundant EH&S risks and other things. And then you've got the extended enterprise, which I'll talk about in the next slide. And we have to keep all this change in sync. That we can be completely knowledgeable about the law and regulation, but that doesn't make us compliant if the business has changed and that control isn't in place on the environment or the health and safety. And that's significant. But the modern organization is also the extended enterprise. Vendors, suppliers, outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, brokers, agents, dealers, partners, intermediaries, and more. The modern organization is not defined by brick and mortar walls and traditional employees. It is the extended web of third-party relationship. And their environmental issues are your environmental issues. Their health and safety issues are your health and safety issues. Their social accountability, like child labor, forced labor, bribery and corruption and things, are your issues. And you have to manage, these risks across the extended web of third-party relationships. That's absolutely significant. So in the next slide, this all means that businesses must act in good faith towards their customers, employees, stakeholders, communities, and partners. Trust and integrity have become absolutely critical to the organization. But on the next slide, too often ESG and particularly EH&S, environmental health and safety, is like the Winchester Mystery House in San Jose, California. Maybe I'll have a chance to visit there this week as I head to the Bay Area. But this is a sprawling mansion that was built in the 1800s. It cost $5.5 million to build in the 1800s. You calculate inflation, that's an extremely expensive house today. It took 38 years to build, had 147 different builders, but no design, no blueprint, no architect. At the end of the day, it's got doors that open to walls or 20-foot drops, staircases that go up or down to nowhere, hallways that go to nowhere, skylights that are on floors instead of ceilings. It doesn't make sense. But this is a lot of GRC programs, and particularly like EH&S programs over the last 38 years, that there's been 147 different builders doing their little pieces. We got this regulatory issue, let's solve this, with a document or spreadsheet or an email. We have this other health and safety issue, let's buy software for that. And nobody stepped back and say, how should this be designed? How would environmental health and safety, ESG, look if we can design this properly for the organization instead of haphazardly approaching it from a lot of different directions and angles, with a lot of different departments going in different directions? I often find that when I talk to different compliance and control functions, that 80% of their staff time is actually spent managing documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and not improving risk and compliance and control. ESG, on the next slide, I like to define as doing the right thing, that it's about being the bastion of integrity. And in the words of our favorite Premier League fictional coach and philosopher, Ted Lasso, doing the right thing is never the wrong thing. When it comes to the focus of environmental, social governance, and the aspects that pour into it, from environmental health and safety, we can, in the US, we get in battles of left versus right on these politics and things. In Europe, there's much more concerted effort in moving forward with this. But at the heart of it is, what are your values and commitment to the environment? What are your values and commitment to the social aspects of the organization and the communities you serve, whether it's your employees, your partners, your supply chain, or even your customers and the communities where you operate in? And how do you govern the organization? What are your values there? And making sure that those values are being followed in the organization. And so doing the right thing is absolutely never doing the wrong thing. When we commit to what our values are and be able to demonstrate that in the practices and processes and transactions of the organization, that's what true ESG is about, environmental social governance. But all this needs to get reflected on the next slide into our company culture. I'm a global ambassador for risk management with the Institute of Risk Management in London. And we published this paper back 12 years ago in 2012 called Risk Culture Resources for Practitioners. It's still extremely relevant today. In it, we have the ABC model, the attitudes, behavior, culture. The attitudes of the individuals forms the behavior of the organization, which forms the culture of the organization, which has a symbiotic relationship influencing further attitudes and behavior. That culture of attitudes, behavior, culture, that needs to line up with your policies on the environment and health and safety and the social accountability, because we can say one thing, but do another thing. On the aspects of governance in ESG, I've got a code of conduct here on my laptop that back in the year 2000, it was the model code of conduct. Other companies are copying to be their code of conduct. I'm talking about Enron's code of conduct, who was rampant with bribery and corruption, led to Sarbanes-Oxley compliance. When our code of conduct or our policies say one thing about ESG and EH&S, but our corporation's practices and culture says a completely different thing, we've got problems. We need to make sure that the two are aligned. So on the next slide, GRC is how ESG gets done. That's how I say it. And in GRC, as defining the OSEG GRC capability model, and in this context, CoreStream already referenced this in their introduction slide, that GRC is a capability that enables an organization to reliably achieve objectives. They can be entity-level objectives, division, department, process, project, or even asset-level objectives. They can be our environmental objectives, health and safety objectives, social accountability objectives, and then we address uncertainty, the risk. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. That's the ISO 31000 definition of risk. So we set our environmental, health and safety, ESG objectives, then we address the uncertainty and risk to those objectives. And then, of course, we act with integrity around those as well. But on the next slide, EHS, ESG requires a lot of orchestration. There's a lot of departments involved. I was talking to a global pharmaceutical firm that has the ESG being led out of the corporate compliance group. Finance leads the ESG reporting. Audit is in charge of ESG assurance. Public relations is in charge of ESG communications. But of course, then there's the role of environment and health and safety and all these other groups involved too. We need somebody that's going to be that ESG controller, that sustainability officer that can coordinate all these different groups across the organization to work together. This means on the next slide that we need a top-down approach to bring together EHS and ESG strategy, process, information, and technology. that can take in these manual processes and disparate systems and integrate these into a cohesive strategy for the organization. Next slide, please. This means that, we bring in together our overall understanding of the ESG objectives and map these to the ESG related risks and controls, monitoring, managing the issues through resolution, the roles on who owns that objective, who owns the risk, who's the subject matter expert in the risk. They get reflected in our policies. We meet our regulatory requirements like EU CSRD, EU CSDDD, California's a law, and so much more. And we understand ESG in the context of the organization and its operations. So next slide, please. This means that we need good technology out there, like our host Enhesa, that can take in a lot of different data points on laws and regulations, enforcement actions, and all these different elements, and understand these, contextualize them, and help the organization build out action items. And so that 360-degree ESG, EH&S contextual analytics intelligence capabilities is absolutely critical on that intelligence side that Enhesa delivers. And that moves us into the next slide, in which that GRC platform, like what CoreStream delivers that our other host today, brings in that defensible ESG and EH&S in the context of broader GRC, that we know what policy was communicated with date and time, what ESG control on the environment or health and safety was monitored and assessed on what date and time. Were there exceptions to controls or policies? Were those documented? Do we meet our requirements? How can we show those sequence of events that we met our requirements? We need that defensible system of record of activities, workflow, processes, and transactions that CoreStream delivers to us, that leverages and integrates the content of Enhesa here in this area as well. All this, in my last slide, helps us deliver agile ESG and EH&S, where we're aware of the range of our ESG objectives and risks. We're aligned from different departments and functions to work together. We're responsive to changes in the business to keep ESG and EH&S current. We're agile on that horizon scanning of what's coming at the organization through that intelligence like Enhesa provides so that we can prepare the organization. We understand that bad things will happen so that we're monitoring our environment like with CoreStream to look at the broad perspective of ESG controls and EHS controls in the environment so that we can find issues and resolve them and be resilient and keep them contained. And we're leveraging technology and content like Enhesa and CoreStream to make our processes more efficient, where 80% of our staff time isn't chasing things, but actually improving EH&S and ESG within the organization. So with that, that's my introductory thoughts, and I'll turn this back over to our host to guide us through the rest of the presentation today.
That's great. Thank you so much, Michael, for that introduction. Very comprehensive in a short amount of time. Paul, from a platform point of view, can you help point us and help us better understand how CoreStream supports the initiatives that Michael just described with its technology?
Absolutely. Thank you. So CoreStream is very much kind of the ultimate in configurability and flexibility to meet any GRC needs, as I mentioned earlier on. Often the analogy I use is it's like a big box of Lego bricks, and every organization is fundamentally buying the same box of Lego bricks, but it's which pre-built starting point are we using depending upon the use case. So that may be about regulatory intelligence integrated with Enhesa and bringing that through to mapping to policies, for example. Or other organizations may wish to go regulatory intelligence with risk assessments and so forth. So all of it is very much around that analogy of Lego bricks, where we can essentially configure it around and digitize an organization's approach and processes. And that can change and evolve over time as functions become more involved. Often for organizations to begin with, it's one or two areas of functional capability based on immediate needs and business case. And then over time that evolves. And very much the capability here is about driving efficiency through automation and using AI as well. But it's also about standardizing aspects across an organization. So how do you understand and interpret the regulatory guidance? How do you map that through to your policies so that your employees and your third parties understand the rules of the road? How does that link into you doing risk assessments in a standardized way so that you're managing uncertainty with regards to complying with the regulations, but also achieving your organizational objectives? What are the controls you've put in place? How do you know they're operating? Are you conforming with the rules and regulations? How do you gain assurance over all those elements? But then also, how do you know that your third parties, your extended enterprise is also conforming? And what risk do they pose to you, in particular around ESG, as those things evolve and come through? All the way mapping it all the way back to those regulatory pieces of intelligence provided by Enhesa so that you have that end-to-end clear line of sight. And wrapping that into a management system for ESG and EH&S. So that's very much CoreStream is your single toolkit that brings the whole thing together, but focuses on digitizing your processes, recognizing that each organization's approach is different, but we want to feed in that regulatory intelligence and map everything and manage that whole GRC framework, like that 360-degree picture that Michael shared. Every aspect around that thing is what you achieve within CoreStream, bringing in those regulatory intelligence pieces.
Thank you. Excellent description. Now we'll turn to Mary and invite you to answer a similar question. Can you speak to where Enhesa's content fits within the framework Michael described, especially as it relates to the CoreStream platform we just heard about from Paul?
That's lovely. Thanks, Jill. And huge thanks also to Michael and Paul for explaining how GRC is now starting to be utilised by companies to support and manage their sustainability and ESG objectives. So where does Enhesa and EHS and sustainability compliance sit within this GRC landscape? Well, as both Michael and Paul have alluded, it all starts with the regulatory content. It all starts with needing to know what applies to you, what you need to be thinking about in each of the areas of operation, whether it's jurisdictional, whether it's within this extended enterprise, as Michael referred to it. Well, as we know, corporate sustainability and ESG is now an integral part of doing business and is subject to an unprecedented level of scrutiny by a multitude of stakeholders. So let's see just how fast this agenda is developing. And Michael referred to some numbers at the start of his introduction, and I'm also going to start with numbers. So just recently, our team of Enhesa analysts identified almost 1,200 new regulatory developments related to ESG topics in the first 6 months of this year alone. So the publication of 1,200 new, amended or updated, mostly compliance-related requirements in a very short period of time. Now, this should start to ring alarm bells for any company. And when you think that these developments included some of the big game changers, such as the CSRD, the CSDDD, the IFRS sustainability standards, and the for now suspended SEC climate disclosure requirements, it becomes more and more evident that the requirements set out in these instruments, as well as the potential risks associated with their non-compliance, need to be understood, managed, and addressed. And another important element to factor in is that in the past, a large number of these regulatory requirements and developments focused on, as Michael called them, the bricks and mortar of operations. Well, now we know that an awful lot of these newer requirements extend way past that. They extend past companies' operations and out into their supply and value chains. And in addition to the aforementioned risk of non-compliance, additional risks such as disruption to supply chains from suppliers who may not yet be able to meet some of the new sustainability criteria, risks arising from accusations of greenwashing, risks to brand, and maybe even risk of lack of access to investment. All of these risks now carry with them potential major financial repercussions. So into this new world of mandatory sustainability reporting, we see that EHS compliance data is playing a never increasingly crucial role. You can see from this slide that we talk about our content at Enhesa, both in terms of the regulatory content and our tools. So companies already using our EHS and sustainability compliance data can focus on those topics material to their reporting, and our ability to potentially provide this data to platforms like CoreStream allows companies the opportunity to integrate their EHS and ESG compliance intelligence into CoreStream GRC infrastructure. So we here at Enhesa are already seeing these solutions intersect with GRC, and this intersection of EHS, ESG, and GRC is becoming more and more evident. So at this stage, I'd like to finish on this thought. It is now time to look at how GRC needs to respond to and encompass ESG and sustainability requirements from a strategic objectives and a regulatory content and tools point of view. So Jill, I'm going to hand it back to you now.
Great. That was a wonderful thought for us to end on, because the next part of this webinar will invite you three into a conversation. We have a set of 3 questions, which we'll ask each of you in turn. Please, everyone weigh in on the same question before we move on to the next. And we'll go in order with Michael, Paul, and then Mary. So starting with you, Michael, the first question is, across the global companies that you work with every day, are you hearing that EHS and sustainability are becoming more important at the C-level?
Most definitely. I see this on a regular basis. And in fact, there's actually been some RFPs I've interacted on that there's board level attention and oversight in this area. And so I'm seeing a lot of interaction and activity specifically with senior executives, C-level people in the board, to be able to engage on broad aspects of governance, risk, and compliance, but particularly around EH&S, and the driver of that is ESG, the environmental social governance. And particularly in Europe with the EU CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and the EU CSDDD, the Due Diligence Directive. That requires a lot of board level oversight of the overall ESG program and involvement. This isn't something to approach tactically, but strategically. In fact, one global hospitality firm I've been interacting with is talking that their ESG program is their strategic resilience program. And so boards are very involved in ESG, and with that context into EH&S and broader GRC. Particularly in Europe, but also as that intersects around the world, so global brands and things. In the US, it is a little more fractured, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't, but it is. But you know, there's 50,000 firms have to comply with the EU CSRD. 12,500 of them is my understanding next year in 2025. So they better start collecting information and be working on this now if they've got to start reporting in January, 7 months from now. And so that's a critical concern. And it definitely requires board level involvement. And there's a significant amount of those firms that have to respond to EU CSRD that aren't headquartered in Europe or not headquartered in the EU, to be more accurate. They could be headquartered in the UK. I've talked to many firms there, many in the US and around the world, even Australia, that have to respond to EU CSRD. So there's just some opening thoughts.
And to you, Paul, the same question?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely echo Michael's points around the regulatory drivers. I'd also touch upon, for me, some of the societal and consumer drivers. So yes, you've got the regulatory regimes and the need for that transparency and reporting, but also consumer behaviors and societal expectations in terms of shareholders, stakeholders, investors, in terms of what their demands are, is definitely shaping the conversation at the C-level. I think that has led organizations to define their objectives, which now intrinsically, from a strategic point of view, have ESG, EHS built into them. So they've got their reporting obligations, but they've also said, this is what we're doing strategically. Couple that with, obviously, you've got the CSDDD that Michael mentioned, but also the wider supply chain in terms of how it's behaving. So an organization's customers are demanding information, intelligence, understanding the risk they're going to pose as a supplier to or a business partner to that organization. And so all of that coming together with the C-level's desire to have the holistic and integrated information so they can make decisions Are we achieving our strategic objectives? Which way do we need to pivot? How do we use ESG as a competitive advantage? All of those kind of things are causing this conversation to shift very, very quickly. We can only reflect on it further when you take in information like the stuff produced by the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. Also notes this as a result of some of the net zero transition planning that's going on within organizations.
Great. And finally, over to Mary.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot I can add to what both Paul and Michael have said, but I just put the microscope a little bit on the CSRD, which we're all talking about, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive and the ESRS, and just point out that under the E of the in the ESRS reporting standards, there are 5 reporting standards relating to environmental topics, and they're climate change, pollution, water, biodiversity, resource use. And in the social elements, the 4 reporting standards, 2 of them specify health and safety metrics. So what I wanted to point out was a lot of companies will already have some really good compliance information embedded in their businesses. And I think both Michael and Paul have alluded to the fact that an awful lot of the GRC and ESG is pulling together data that's already in place, maybe in disparate parts of the businesses. And we're seeing that companies are now building this internal infrastructure and embedding their sustainability objectives, at the highest level into not just their own businesses, but also into their supply chains.
Excellent. Thank you. I think this next question is a nice dovetail into that one because it refers to each of the requirements starting to come to the fore. The question, we'll begin with Michael again, is how can companies best use their existing GRC framework to meet the new regulatory reporting requirements we've just been describing from the likes of the CSRD, IFRS, and SEC?
I guess part of that depends what we mean by framework, because so often people think of organizations think of GRC as technology, and framework is something broader that involves the strategy and process. And from a framework point of view, I personally love the OSEG GRC capability model with its 4 components of learn, align, perform, and improve. And in that context, we need to understand our environment, that learn, which is continuous, our external environment, as well as internal environment. We align and work together across our different different groups and departments and functions. We identify our ESG objectives. We understand our risks to those objectives. We analyze those risks and we develop a treatment program. We perform we implement controls. We monitor, we report, we assess, we respond, and then we improve our program over time. But when it comes to the technology side of things, you have to be selective. You need to make sure that you have technology that is highly agile, that can adapt to your organization instead of forcing your organization to adapt, and also technology that can be delivered to encompass EH&S and ESG in these concepts, because some GRC technology and platform is built for IT security, and it's very rigid in things, and it doesn't provide a robust view into the world of EH&S and ESG. And so there's a range of GRC technology out there, and you need to make sure that you have agile solutions that can deliver on that framework appropriately.
And to you, Paul?
Absolutely echo everything that Michael has said. I think I would also add this is also about leveraging the existing components in place. So if you think about some of the stuff I said previously around the capabilities from a CoreStream point of view, the ability to map your regulatory information to your policies and then understand adherence to those. So leveraging those kind of capabilities whereby you've already got a framework in place, you've already got mechanisms to push out policies across your employees and your third parties. So how you link all of that in and leverage that capability. Also, from a reporting point of view, you've got many organizations will have many controls that have been matured and embedded over time to cover financial reporting. Well, some of this stuff is not dissimilar in terms of capturing information around an organization when you come to the carbon reporting dimension and capturing that and rolling it up, leveraging those controls, that understanding. Don't reinvent the wheel. You've got something already embedded and just expand it and align it. And then also thinking about some of the kind of risk management and the uncertainty to achieving your objectives around achieving some of these sustainability aspects. So all those aspects you already have embedded as a business from a GRC point of view should be leveraged, in my view. It's about just seeing how you use your existing processes and framework over that new set of topic areas.
Great. And finally, Mary?
Yeah, this is always the problem with going last. Everything has been said by both Paul and Michael, and I would just like to reiterate, this whole idea of internal collaboration, leverage, what you already have. If you've got, a solid GRC or ESG sustainability infrastructure, you're already going to find it less of a challenge to incorporate all of these newer requirements. But yeah, absolutely echo what both the guys have said. Look at what you have, make sure that you can access it in an agile way, and then at the same time, identify any gaps that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Mary. And for our third and final question, again, we'll ask each of you in turn, starting with Michael. This one's a bit of a two-parter. So if you had a crystal ball, what is the best case future state for companies to manage sustainability and EHS as part of GRC? And the second parter here is, how will they get there? What's that delta or that journey between today's current state and tomorrow's future state?
Wow, there was a lot there. Can you just sort of repeat that question once more?
Absolutely. What's the best case scenario future state for companies to manage sustainability and EHS as part of GRC? And sort of how will they get there, right? How will they change from where they're at today to where they should be tomorrow?
Yeah, I mean, so organizations need to do, first off, really define what their strategy is and get the different departments and functions involved. And that includes their overall vision and strategy and departments that need to be involved in that, how they're going to work together, who's going to lead the strategy. From there, define your processes around EH&S and ESG and how that fits into the broader GRC context. And then the information technology environment that's going to support that. We need that sort of that perspective of that vision. And then you need to do a detailed current state analysis of what are we doing today? I mean, there's aspects of EH&S and ESG that are definitely happening in the organization, and it could be rather mature in some organizations, but in a lot of organizations, it's sort of like this wild west of activity where there's a lot of different departments that have gone in a lot of different directions, a lot of redundancy and gaps and overlap. And it's that Winchester mystery house of ESG that I mentioned earlier, or EH&S. And so what is your current state? And then what's that future state that you're aiming towards? And what's your roadmap to get there and along that line? And so you need a good understanding of what your current state is and then what your future state is, your roadmap to get there, and the business case of why this is of value to the organization. You need to make sure the right team is on board and willing to work together. You need to make sure you have the right technology foundation that can deliver on that future state and that you're not building on something that's sort of stuck in an IT security point of view. Or something like that can't really deliver on EH&S and ESG focused GRC implementation. And from there, you need to break your program up into achievable components because for a lot of organizations, this is not a small project, but a fairly big project in the organization. And you just don't run up Mount Everest. You've got to be able to break things up into achievable segments. When you climb Mount Everest, there's base camps so that your body can acclimate to the altitude and recover. And same thing with a big project in this space. You need to make sure that you break things up into achievable chunks and not take too much on. But then you also need to be ready for change, because that's the one thing that is apparent in this world is, we might be working towards that future state, but the things will change in the environment. We have to be able to address that.
Excellent. Thank you. Paul, from your point of view, the same question?
Yeah, I was thinking about this as Michael was talking. So for me, and I don't want to generalize, but I'd say today most things are siloed within the ES and G across an organization, but also between some of the GRC functions, and definitely between ESG and GRC in the majority of businesses. Now, tomorrow is really that integrated capability, which is everything that Michael was describing in terms of that roadmap. But to me, as I look at this, that's the kind of functional dimension. And we've got to overlay into that some of the stuff Michael mentioned as well, which is around the organizations are going to have objectives. Now, this will be part of their organizational move, their transformation, their restructure and reapproach to things as they move towards that net zero transition and go through those changes. So very much as the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership will talk about, it's that drive and that move to that net zero transition will mean that actually those that do it, focusing on objectives and managing all the dimensions together in an integrated way, will actually come out of it with better performance out of that process. And that's all got to be wrapped into that business case, that executive buy-in in terms of those multi-dimensions. Add on to that some of the stuff we've been talking about from a supply chain point of view. And as organizations become much more integrated with their supply chain, with their partners out there, that third party piece and how the whole thing hangs together is also going to be that future state. So to me, this is a journey, and it's really about that journey has got to move in terms of the integration of the various functions and capabilities at the same pace that the organization aims to move at from an objectives and transition point of view from a net zero aspect. But to me, that's that kind of delta from today to the future and how you plan that through to get to that ultimate place.
Great, thank you. And Mary, the same question over to you.
Yeah, and again, I think it's, the key words here are, collaboration, integration, look to see what you have, all the building blocks that Michael mentioned, all the integration that Paul mentioned, using a platform, such as CoreStream. But I think the other thing to think about is that we're seeing more and more from a reporting point of view, integration with financial reporting. So we're going to see a lot more of the sustainability and financial reporting functions becoming more and more integrated as well. But also the fact that an awful lot of the data that we're talking about will need to be tagged. I mean, one of the overlooked elements, I think, of the CSRD at the moment is that each piece of data that is used in the reporting will need to be tagged so it could go into a European single access point. Now that brings transparency to a whole new level. And I think, when companies now are starting to, and Paul mentioned, they're on a journey, most companies are on a journey. And as they're starting to think about building their infrastructure at the moment or realigning their current, separate pieces of infrastructure, they need to start to think about how that is going to look in the future in terms of this topic of transparency of each and every single piece of data used for reporting.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary. Well, many thanks, all three of you, for these insights. I found this conversation to be incredibly enlightening and informative, and I'm sure our audience did too. This is, of course, probably a topic we could talk about for a week, let alone the short hour we have here together. But I'm sure it's safe to say we've only just begun to scratch the surface of the importance of EHS and sustainability compliance to GRC programs and initiatives. So as we wrap up and invite audience questions in the next phase, I wanted to add a few closing thoughts and how this relates to Enhesa's values. So it's clear from our discussion today that more and more companies and their stakeholders, both their customers and investors that you all referred to, are going to scrutinize EHS and sustainability compliance data in light of the regulations that we're just talking about, Mary, which is why it's so important to know what you need to comply with everywhere you operate in the world and have that confidence. This will generate lots and lots and lots of additional data. We all now need to somehow manage it, keep it straight, which will in turn lead to companies needing to ensure they have their reporting infrastructure in place. You mentioned, Mary, financial reporting, which is probably the farthest cry you can get from like sifting through piles of spreadsheets, right? It has to be incredibly transparent, well-managed, rigorous, and disciplined. So the data has to be harmonized, transparent, kind of available to everyone who needs it, including the outside world, customers and investors. It's a huge shift from today, as you've all been describing. And as Paul mentioned, one of the key components of that reporting infrastructure has to be a super agile and reactive software platform, something that can grow with you, something you can customize to your business's needs, and including changing needs as those change and new regulations come online. Technology, of course, helps us achieve efficiency, lets our personnel resources focus on more high value, more strategic initiatives. And a final thought on strategy, Michael helped us understand the increasing role that EHS and sustainability compliance is taking in the established, or the already established world of GRC. It will become part of the institutional knowledge managed in a GRC framework to help us all reduce risk, reduce those compliance gaps, and make businesses more resilient, more prepared, and more strategic. This is definitely a conversation that Enhesa, CoreStream, and Michael will continue having, and we'll invite you back for future webinars and events like this one. Please connect with us on LinkedIn, etc. My personal take, real similar to Mary's, it's all about the collaboration, the data, understanding your objectives, and building the teams, resources, and infrastructure needed to meet those changing requirements. And as you think on that as well, we invite your questions. So please submit them in the Q&A box. We have a few minutes here at the end that we've left to engage you, so you can engage our experts and ask them your burning questions. Please go ahead, type them in. Make sure you get them. Please go ahead and make sure you include your name and email. Sometimes we get anonymous questions and we can't reach out and supply answers later. So if there's any we don't get to during this time, we'll be sure and reach out and send the answers along to you one by one from our experts. So as our questions begin to roll in, I'd like to start with the first one. The question is, how do you build a business case for investing in technology for GRC and compliance? Maybe, Michael, you'd like to start with this one. You've probably gotten this question a lot.
Certainly, when I work on a business case, it starts with what I was referring to just a few minutes ago, that current state and the future state. You know, this is where we're at today. This is what it's costing us. This is what's not getting done and delivered. And here's our future state, that ideal state that we're aiming towards. And then we build that business case on that delta, you know, that quantification of value between that current state and future state. And when I work on business cases in this area, I break it down into 4 areas. The first one is efficiency, which is typical ROI, traditional ROI. Time saved, money saved. Before, it's taking us 200 hours to build this report. Now it could be done in an hour. That's huge. And that's an actual fact that I've come across in one of my business cases. You know, 80% of our staff time is actually spent managing documents, spreadsheets, and emails and chasing things, and not actually improving EH&S and ESG. And now we can flip that around. That's efficiency. The second element of a business case is effectiveness. More getting done, better insight, less things slipping through cracks. You know, effectiveness is actually, excuse me, a little bit of a cold, is actually a risk reduction. You know, before we implemented, you know, our strategy and implemented with that CoreStream and Enhesa, you know, here's where we're at with our inherent risk. Now after we implement Enhesa and CoreStream and execute our strategy, here's our residual risk, because more is getting done, less things slipping through cracks. We have greater awareness of the requirements and regulations out there. That's effectiveness. So efficiency is one angle, effectiveness is another angle. The third angle is resilience. You know, improving the organization's ability to find EH&S and ESG issues and contain them, and they're still small issues before they become a big issue for the organization. And then the fourth element of a strong business case is agility. You know, how will this strategy and this approach enable us to keep up with the volume of business change and regulatory change and risk change to the business, so that our program's not always 6 months to 2 years behind?
Excellent, thank you. Please keep the questions rolling in from the audience. Our next one I see here is ESG involves a lot of different roles across the company. How do we get them all working together? I think you talked a lot about roles. Michael, did you want to take this one on as well?
So what are some of the roles?
And how do we get them all working together? How, I guess, maybe how, yeah, affect that collaboration.
So roles. First off, you need to understand that there's a lot of different roles involved. You know, when it comes to ESG, I mean, you've got environmental roles, you have health and safety roles, you have supply chain procurement roles, privacy fits under the S, human resources, of course, fits under the S significantly. The G, you've got internal controls or financial reporting, transparency, anti-bribery and corruption, all those elements. And so you need to really map out what are the different roles that need to be part of the strategy. Who are some of the primary roles for overall strategic pieces of it, and particularly who's going to run the program? Is that corporate compliance and ethics? Is it chief sustainability officer or controller? Who is that role, and how are they going to coordinate with these other roles? And one of the key things to success, in my opinion, is that whoever's going to lead the strategy needs to be very collaborative across these roles and functions to be able to address them. And be able to get different departments to work together. Because too often you get somebody that leads it that's operating the blinders on, that only sees their view of things and can't really coordinate across a lot of these.
Thank you. Great. Our next audience question is, what practical steps should I take if I have not begun to look at integrating ESG and GRC? Maybe Paul, would you like to take this question on?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think I hinted at some of these things previously and some of the things I covered. But to me, this is really about looking at those building blocks. So what is that regulatory piece you need to understand? So first of all, take the Enhesa content and do that kind of mapping into your existing policy framework. Identify your gaps. That'll then help you understand where you've got to do some remedial actions. But I think it was Mary that said you've often got a lot of this already covered. You just don't realize it until you do that mapping. You then need to operationalize some of those elements, particularly those which are gaps. That's about putting in those processes so that people can confirm they are conforming. And then very much about what existing reporting outputs can be leveraged from information we capture. And again, what is the next set of gaps? So to me, it's really about, let's just break down and understand what we need to do, check it against what we already do, so we're not reinventing the wheel. To me, that's got to be the kind of very, very first step. Plus, then saying, well, where are we going strategically as an organization in terms of our objectives, so that you can map the practical steps you're taking to that longer term approach as well.
Great, thank you. And our final question that we have time for, where do you see the regulatory environment going next? Maybe Mary, you'd like to take this one on.
Yeah, I'll take that. I think it's going to be more about, some of these bigger regulations and developments that we talked about, like CSRD and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. It's more about the likes of those bedding down more. There'll be a lot more guidance released. I know FRAG are releasing at least 5 different guidance documents related to CSRD. We're already seeing a lot of interoperability from a reporting point of view between the likes of FRAG, IFRS, GRI, CDP. So I think that's going to get stronger, more integrated and more interoperable. But I think we will see a lot more ESG topical related compliance requirements coming in at that jurisdictional level, as jurisdictions start to embed some of these more global approaches into their own jurisdictions. And I think one thing to keep an eye out for is, we mentioned it a couple of times, the IFRS and the ISSB. The IFRS have got agreement from IOSCO to actually go ahead and start embedding the sustainability reporting requirements from their S1 and S2 into jurisdictional financial reporting frameworks. So that's something worth keeping an eye out. So I think there will be more. There'll be lots more and across the world, but those bigger pieces of legislation will be all about now for the next 5 years or so, embedding them into, getting a lot of best practice related to them.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mary. Well, that's all the time we have today. Please, as you leave us, make sure you fill out the survey and let us know how it went and suggest future topics. A big thank you again to our team, to Michael, to Paul, to Mary. Big thank you to CoreStream for co-hosting with us today. And please connect with all these awesome speakers on LinkedIn. We look forward to engaging with you further, and have a wonderful day. Thank you all. Goodbye.
I'll